Hello and welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'm your host, Mark Philpott, and on today's show we're going to go deep into the world of aviation. What really happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 370? How stressed are all of the crew members and pilots on the flights that we take to go on our family holidays? And do we know what's coming in the next generation of aircraft? Well, my guest today is an aviation expert, and he's here to share all of these and a lot more on the Global Travel Channel podcast show. I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. Mark Martin. Mark, welcome to the Global Travel Channel podcast show.
Mark, good day. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be on this, and it's wonderful talking to you about something as exciting as travel and something that embeds all of us in our day-to-day lives, and especially whenever you see an airplane fly over you.
Exactly right. Now, talking about travel, whereabouts are you speaking to us from today?
Well, I'm speaking to you from a very sunny Malaysia. I'm over in Kuala Lumpur, and it was the weather was pretty topsy-turvy yesterday, but it's warm and sunny outside, and perfect weather to fly a kite, play golf, or you could if you got yourself a little airplane, you can go flying and have a wonderful time.
Are you going to be doing either of those things after the podcast show today?
I'm hoping to step out and play golf in the afternoon, so let's see how that goes.
Well, I hope the thunderstorms stay away so you can get the round finished and that you don't get interrupted just as you're putting out. You'll be trying to emulate Tiger Woods' recent win in the Japan tournament that he played in. Is your game as good as Tiger's at the moment, Mark?
Not far from it. I'm an 18 handicapper, trying my best. Let me put it this way: if I could get even half to Phil Mickelson, I should be all right.
Now, tell me, is this the first time you've ever been on a podcast show?
Mark, I must admit, this is my first time on a podcast. I've never been in a podcast. I've certainly, I've heard quite a few podcasts before, but it's my first. So I'm not sure what do I expect, but I'm gonna run along, and I think this is gonna be a great experience for me. So looking forward to it, Mark.
Well, I'm honoured to have you here, mate, because I know that you're usually on Bloomberg TV and much illustrious channels such as that. So to have you on my humble show, I'm very honoured to have you sitting here listening and talking with me today.
Mark, I'm honored to be here with you, and I've known you for God knows how many years, and I've followed and tracked you from Humaneity and the triathlons, and you're traveling the world and spreading the good word, and I keep saying that you're an inspiration to us. It really is, because in our side of life, and we always want to look to the other what's on the other side of the fence, and you really kind of do inspire quite a few of us, and I'm truly humbled and honored to be on this program and the show with you, and it's wonderful to be here, sir.
Okay, well, we better get on with it then, and we'll stop all the chest beating. So, yes. Talking about inspiring, I'd like you to dedicate this show to someone special in your life, because it would be a great memory for you to be able to share this with somebody, and having it being your first podcast show, then it's a special occasion as well. So who would you like to dedicate this particular show to?
I'd like to dedicate this to my dad. He was a helicopter pilot, one of the few guys who was a helicopter test pilot, check pilot, examiner, instructor. He pretty much ticked all the boxes in aviation back in the day. One of the few guys to fly helicopters out of Somerset in the UK with Westland, and test helicopters in the US with Hiller helicopters in the 90s. So my old man did a lot to build helicopter operations in South Asia, and he also started one of the first few private airlines in India back in 1992. So Dad is an inspiration to me, being where I am at the moment. For me, taking up my whole opportunity and my life in aviation, And the connect that my family has with Southeast Asia goes back to the 70s. Uh, Dad was over in Vietnam in 69, 70, where he was he was also part of the Helicopter Test Pilot Guild. So we go back many years to this region, and so yeah, and it can't get any more ironic and uncanny. Me in Malaysia at the moment, speaking to you on aviation and
Mm.
having this wonderful program. So yeah.
Well, that's a fantastic story. Now, that was a beautiful segue into my first question, which was going to be about how did you first get excited about the aviation industry? And you've probably just answered that by the amazing passion and journey that your father had. Was that when was your first kind of connection to the aviation world, mate?
Well, the first time I kind of knew this is where I wanted to be was I think way back in 1984. So let's see, how old was I? I was about 8 or 9 years old, and so my dad took me up in a helicopter, and I thought that was fascinating. Just to have that whole three-dimensional view to flight. Going up, you're going
Mm,
down, you're
mm,
you're kind of you're turning around, you're spinning around, you're hovering, and I think a lot of that really manifested to a lot curiosity with aviation. How does it fly? What happens when you fly an airplane or a helicopter? Um, so that became one of the starting points in my career, where I was so fascinated by aviation that it did also kind of start affecting me when in school, where I wasn't performing too well in math and in science and physics, and I was like, I mean, this is kind of messed up, you know.
mm.
But as time went by, I figured that, hey, wait a minute, it's all about physics and maths and science, and you know and chemistry, and that's what makes airplanes fly, and that's what gives us what we have today. And I started to channelize my energy into the elements that make up aviation, so to speak. And as they say, the rest is history.
Mm. Incredible. Was there a dream or a goal back when you were a young kid to be a pilot or anything like that?
Well, my dad was with the Indian Air Force, and so whilst you're growing up, and when you're in and out of those military bases, and the officers' enclaves, and you see other guys who are fighter pilots, and you pretty much you're near and around fighter aircraft every day. Um, so it does kind of play on you.
Mm, mm,
My initial dream and my wish was to be a fighter pilot. I thought
mm,
I'll become a fighter pilot, but as times went by, I wasn't too. It was all exciting about flying a high speed jet, but eventually I was like, nah, maybe I need to do something else. I was more aligned um, towards the technicalities of aviation as opposed to flying it, and
mhm, mhm,
so things like aircraft performance, and specs, and improving aircraft performance, and things like range limitation and so on. So I kind of decided to focus on those areas, and to get there, you obviously do need to be a pilot as well. So I did some flying back in the day. I think I did about 160 hours of flying, and so that was a fairly good grounding and basing for me to start looking at and adapting to what I wanted to do in my life, and in my career, and that
mm,
really did work out quite well for me.
mm. Now you're an Indian national. Was all this early experience in India, or were you traveling to other parts of the world to get your experience within the aviation industry?
Well, India back in the day was fairly nascent when it came to aviation technology, and especially things which were more linked towards a strong level of academia or intelligentsia when it came to picking up bits of knowledge and technical learning. So I obviously did have to look westward. Um, and and how that happened was very interesting, Mark. When I just got out of school and was just about getting into flight school, I'd connected with a French company that made light aircraft, and
Mm.
I was pretty interested with that aircraft, and I said, maybe we could do something with this here, and it's a nice trainer aircraft, and believe it or not, they responded back and they said, yeah, no, we'd like to come and meet up with you and have a chat, and here you got this 17, 18-year-old kid versus with the guy across the table who's a 45, 50-year-old senior vice president for a French company called Socata Group Aerospatiale. It's now called Daher Socata.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so this guy's like, why don't you be a tech rep for us in India? And I was like, sure. I mean, if I wouldn't mind. And so that was the first point of getting focused on technology, learning, and aviation, and things like aerospace metals and components, and and that's where it all really began for me, and it did come with loads of challenges. Imagine a 19, 20-year-old kid sitting next to a 50-year-old chief engineer of an aircraft operations company, and he's not going to listen to tech stuff being thrown in front of from some whippersnapper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I figured the only way to get ahead in aviation was to be technically strong, and that's what really started my relentless search, and my my focus with reading up and learning up. All that was right at the edge of being ahead of the professional curve, and that's where it began. And I also did a couple of courses back in the day, which really weren't much. Remember, 1994-95 was, Airbus had just seen 4 years with the 320. Mm-hmm. Boeing was getting out of the 737-200 and moving to the classic. The NGs weren't a thing back then. The 777 was just being announced in development. A330s were already were just about getting into the market with Emirates Airline and and Air France. So the world was starting to see what you call long-range, long-haul aviation, and even globally in the cargo space, we remember, the use of 747 freighters hadn't really hit an overdrive. They were just about getting into the concept of 747 freighters. So this was an aviation world that was kind of discovering itself. We were moving away from the gas guzzlers of the 70s, the DC-10s and the Lockheed 10, the TriStars, and the Convairs, and so this was getting away from the piston to the turboprop to the turbojet, and now switching over to the turbofan, which is obviously more efficient. And so one couldn't have expected a better time to get into the learning phase, just when the world was on the cusp of adapting to new technology for obviously lower carbon emissions, lower sound levels, because back in those days we had some very noisy engines, and also moving towards more cost-efficient aircraft, because burn rates were pretty much halved from what we saw in the late 70s and early 80s. So it was definitely a good time to get in.
I was really excited about having you on the show today, because being a travel show, I've already had a couple of pilots on the show, and they've given us a wonderful insight of what it's like sitting at 35,000 feet behind the controls of, in one case, a Gulfstream corporate jet, and in another case, his own private aircraft. And that's a fascinating insight to travel by flight that us normal people don't get to experience most times in our life. And then I've had a manager from the Seattle Tacoma airport, and that was a fascinating chat to learn about the developments that are going on within the infrastructure world because of new designs of aircraft and the general traveling public, whether they be domestic consumers or whether they be international passengers, to hear about how the industry has really affected those massive pieces of infrastructure and what they're having to do to keep, and I won't say keep ahead because they're never ahead, they're always trying to catch up, aren't they, in terms of their planning. But now having you on the show as an expert within the industry, and it's something that we don't, and when I say we, us travelers who get on an aircraft and go off on a holiday and don't think too much about, one, the aircraft that we're sitting on, unless it's going to crash, and all the other bits and pieces in between that keep us up in the air. Because I've had the fortunate experience of working within some of the logistics global supply chains of some of the big aircraft manufacturers around the world, and I found that to be absolutely fascinating to find out, first of all, the complexities that go into the industry, the incredible focus on safety, and also on technology and where that's going. So having you on the show today has been a real highlight for me, because I want to discuss a lot of those things with you, because I think it's fair to say we're going through a period of history now when the aviation industry is going through enormous change, and probably more so, arguably more so now than it's ever been before. And you've already touched on that with the evolution of aircraft design, and also the fuel and also the engine capacities and that. So would you agree that we're probably in a period of history right now where it's been probably the most revolutionary part of the airline industry development?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Mark. I think you touched on, you pushed all the right buttons there, you know. So let me start with this now. You know, there's over $8 billion spent every year by, you know, airframers and aircraft manufacturers and component makers to make aircraft more and more safe, reliable, efficient. And
so when you talk about those things, Mark, for the average person listening to the show today,
right.
what are some of the brand names that you're alluding to when you talk about those manufacturers?
Sure. So you have the large airframer and assemblers like, you know, Boeing, Airbus. You've got ATR, Embraer. You have also moving a little towards the corporate aviation, general aviation space. You have companies like Dassault, Gulfstream, Cessna, Bombardier. You know, and even surprisingly and interestingly, I want to raise this today. China is also is heavily investing in technology and safety, and so that $8 billion, which is spent every year just on developing aircraft systems and components, and, you know, building in reliability and backups and safety mechanisms and safety systems and standards is just outstanding. And each year they want to beat that and come up with newer and more evolved technologies. So you know, we must understand that it's just been about 110 or 15 years to aviation. Whereas if you go back and look at the evolution of rail transport, rail began in the late 1700s and moved over to and continues to evolve even now. So rail has a development history of over 350 years, whereas, you know, the strides we've taken in air transport in the last 110 or 15 years is actually, you know, crams up the 350 years of rail and multiplies it by at least 5 or 7, and that's where we have air transport. I'll give you a simple example. You know, with aircraft like the 320 and the Boeing 737 and you know, the Bombardier CRJ 1000, the 787, the A350, you have systems on board that if you lose both engines, you can glide and attempt to make a safe landing. You have aerospace materials that are used, that are designed to take impact and transfer minimal shock to the cabin. You've got engines which are designed to not, you know, disseminate high moving parts if you have a part failure. So there's so many technological advances that are there, that are built in, that people don't know about, and rightly so. You said that, what do we know about an aircraft before we fly, you know, when we book a ticket? I agree with you. I think every traveler has a right to know the maintenance status of the aircraft he's getting into. You know, we have that in emerging markets. In the US, before you fly, at the time of booking your ticket, you can know the maintenance status of the aircraft you intend to be seated on. And And I think a lot of that not just builds traveler confidence, but it also substantiates an underlying emphasis on safety. That the airline is responsible, we care, we're governed, we're regulated, we have the FAA and the EASA on top of us, and we're here for your safety. So it's not just a ticket that you're buying. I mean, let's face it, when you buy a ticket, you're just buying place on a seat, but that seat is built in with safety oversight and engineering and maintenance, and how many numerous service bulletins that go into making the aircraft more up to date, technology, software upgrades. So it's all of that you pay for when you buy a ticket, and that's when you got a loved one flying, or your family or a family member, or and that the bigger concern is not the seat that you're going to put the person on, but is that aircraft or the airline, is it safe? And that's the key part here. It's clarity. Excuse me. It's also about being responsible, and it's also about being committed to a mission that is safety and maintenance oversight.
Let me ask you this then, Mark, and if we all go back in our minds to January the 15th in 2009, when US Airways flight 1549 took off from LaGuardia Airport and ended up landing on the Hudson River.
Right.
That was an extraordinary feat of, first of all, pilot management, but also by aircraft technology. I want to ask you, if that plane had been put down on the Hudson River, say 25 years ago, would it have ended in the same result? Or is the stability and technology of the materials in that aircraft today making it more safer than ever to be able to do that kind of landing?
Mark, it's remarkable. I've given that lecture so many times to kids in flight school. 1549, Sully Sullenberger's flight. So that's got three elements. Now, if I could help you visualize, so let's picture three chevrons, right? You've got the first chevron is technology, the second chevron is situational awareness, and the third chevron is flying ability of the pilot. Now, the first chevron is this technology. The A320 is one of the few aircraft which have a ditch button. So if you press the ditch button, it shuts out all the exit valves in the aircraft and gives you a little more time to stay afloat. Okay. The second is about situational awareness, the second chevron. Now, it's all about coming to a decision that is fast, that makes sense, that isn't driven by extraneous review of SOPs or manuals. Now, when we fly, or most pilots fly, and when you're faced with an emergency situation, you usually pull out a book which is called the QRH, or the Quick Response Handbook. It's an emergency checklist. And so what Sullenberger did with his co-pilot was figure out his position. He was just about 3,000, 4,000 feet with no engines, rapid descent. He couldn't make it to Teterboro. He couldn't make it to any of the airports nearby. He couldn't make it to JFK. He said, you know what? I can take this aircraft there because I got absolutely no thrust left. And whilst air traffic control was vectoring him into both those airports, he said, no, listen, I think I can bring this thing down here. And with a lot of the hydraulics not being there, and somehow he managed to. You have something called the RAT, or the ram air turbine. It's these emergency little propellers which pop out of the aircraft that give you hydraulic and sometimes pneumatic power, so that you can run your essential hydraulic system. So the A320 has got two of those on both sides of the fuselage. And so this guy did the right thing by being situationally aware of what he needed to do, because if he started looking up at manuals and he started looking at alternate airports, he wouldn't have made it. And the third is pilot flying ability. Now, as a naval pilot, Sully Sullenberger, when you're in the Navy, you're taught and trained how to ditch an airplane, because you're flying out of a carrier, an aircraft carrier in the middle of the ocean, right? So, there will be a situation, or there will be moments where you would have to ditch an airplane. And the Navy teaches you how to ditch an aircraft with perfection. Okay, so you're thrown in a simulator. They throw the scenarios of, you can't go back to the carrier. You got no fuel. You got no, you're shut up. What do? You ditch in the ocean. And they literally put you through several scenarios of how to bring an aircraft perfectly, bring it on water. And all those abilities, all those, it was just the perfect piece to getting the whole puzzle matched. Technology, situational awareness, and pilot flying ability, all of them came together in perfect unison. And what he did was make history. But how lucky are pilots, are other pilots when they face a situation as that? We've talked about 1549, but have we replicated the learning from 1549 with all airlines across the world? Can I walk in tomorrow morning if I'm auditing, I'm not going to bring any names here, but let's say airline XYZ, right? And can I ask them, do you have a simulated training session that addresses the 1549 scenario? So the mistake we repeatedly make, Mark, is that knowledge and learning must be replicated and transferred and translated to a wider region, so that it can come of use to them when the chips are down. And that's very important. We've seen several incidents in the past where sometimes the pilots just don't know what on earth are they up to.
They're doing,
and you can't blame them, because they're in an emergency situation. You got smoke in the cabin. You have crews going insane and back in the galley trying to prepare the aircraft for an emergency landing. He's trying to do stuff which is to the best of his ability. But you know what? And giving him a little bit of a heads up. Hey, if he's got that in training, that that happened, that occurred, and that's how they did it. Maybe it might be of use to you.
Now, I've got a hot tip for you, Mark, because you need to keep listening to my podcast series, because coming up shortly, I've actually got a passenger who was on flight 1549 coming on my show.
That's wonderful. I'd love to be. I will definitely listen to that one.
So she's an Australian lady, and she was on the flight that day, and it's going to be interesting to hear her perspective from a passenger point of view, and also now after listening to your perspective on all those different areas of the puzzle coming together to make that a perfect scenario. I wonder what it was like actually sitting inside the cabin when that event was happening and unfolding.
And you know what? Maybe I could, no spoilers here, but I could tell you what she's going to say. She'd probably say that it was a calm, relaxed cabin where everybody knew what they were doing. There was no panic, and everybody were worried, and they'd probably be shocked about landing landing on a river, But and that's precisely it. It's all about how you deal with that situation. It's being calm and I think we've seen this in aviation, and you've been part of aviation yourself, Mark. You'd know this, that the best way to deal with a crisis is to respond with a calm mind and a calm and a well balanced self, right? And that's usually what works best in an emergency situation, because the more you start panicking yourself and everybody around you, you're not going to make it.
Has meditation become a tool used with pilot training these days?
I'm really not sure what the definition of meditation and a pilot is, but but I'm kind of hoping it's got to do something with yoga. No, I'm just trying to kid around here. Well,
I'm saying meditation versus medication. Yeah, so
yes.
we got to distinguish between the two.
I would like to talk about something more important, and that's the psychological part of the job. But when we walk into our workplace, it's an office for us is a desk, a computer, a telephone, and the little place where we go get a cup of coffee and get a glass of water and come back to continue our work. But for a pilot, his office is that little cockpit. Okay, when he enters the cockpit, he has to shut his private personal life and focus on what he has to do. For us, when we work, Mark, when we go to work, we can sometimes take our personal stuff there. We had a fight with our girlfriend in the morning, and somebody's had a fight with their with a friend, or so we got our loans to pay, and we bounce a check here and there, and so we kind of take that stress to work, and we can afford to take it to work because the kind of work we do, it's 8 hours of, and we're not really working at a nuclear reactor. We're trying to run a business, or make a business work, or drive a business in a new region, or drive a business, full stop. But for a pilot, imagine your kids are up to no good. You had a fight with your wife. You something happened at home, and you show up for work next morning, and you're trying to blank all of that out, and still try and land in thick fog with bad weather and heavy air traffic control congestion. It all adds up and builds up, and I've been pushing this for ever since that German wings crash happened. I've been getting airlines and regulators to start bringing up mandatory psychological review. And the whole idea of psychological review is that, even if you can talk, if you can get it all out of your system, once in a month with somebody, and, not keep the burden inside you, you will fly, and your ability to fly improves, and you're obviously flying more relaxed and more calm, or just get somebody to help you deal with that stress. And we've seen this before, and some of it hasn't been too well. And I'm going to skirt a little bit around controversy here, with Middle Eastern carriers, but I'm not going to name them. I've seen many cases where flight attendants and young crew show up, and they get so inundated with all that's around that it starts to take an impact on their personal lives. And we've seen this take an ugly turn, where I remember when I was in the Middle East, there was a wonderful, charming English girl who committed suicide. And it was devastating, because a lot of what she was going through could have been resolved and addressed by simple, basic counseling. Just talking to a friend, picking up the phone, speaking with somebody, telling them how you feel, and getting a load off your chest, and feeling a whole lot lighter. But that girl just kept it in, and she was, obviously it was in her personal life and her professional life, and I think aviation is extremely competitive. The politics in aviation is unprecedented. It's insane, the level of the kind of stuff that happens in aviation, especially on the darker side of politics. And what the girl ended up doing, and she was absolutely brilliant. She was top of her class, graduated I think she was science. She did very well in school, in school and college, and she had a wonderful job in the Middle East. And to see somebody go at that age, and it's very impacting to those who've been in this industry for a long time. And I'm like going, why did this kid have to do this? Because all she had to do was reach out for help, And that's the sad part, Mark, in places where, when you're an expat, right? When you're in a foreign country, and you pretty much are there to do your job, collect a paycheck, and go home, and you really can't make friends and can't make a good connect with the people there, and you can't open up to anybody, because if you open up to somebody, it's all about exposing yourself, and you're getting into more and more trouble. It's pretty hard, and I think airlines need to come up with something which centers on addressing this as a core issue. It's as simple as this: the state of the aircraft is good, the state of the maintenance that you do on the airplane is excellent, the IFE is excellent. What's the state of your crew's mind?
I think this is a really good point, because many of us, I've been asked, I don't know how many times over the years, what's your favorite airline? And I said, well, it's such a difficult question to answer, and I usually come back to one common denominator that I always use to define what my favorite airline is, and that's the way that I've been treated on the flight by the flight crew. And typically, people will say, oh, I like this one because it's got a flat bed, or I've got more leg room, or blah, blah, blah. But I think most of our experiences on aircraft have been with, well, I had a great trip because I was looked after and they actually took care of me, them being the flight crew, right? And you're bringing up a really relevant point, which says, well, these people are in connection with hundreds of people every single day. They've got people who are not very well behaved at times and are pushing their buttons to the limit, and they've got to deal with that. They've got the pressures of getting the aircraft to the destination on time, where there's an enormous amount of pressure on every one of those flight crew to make sure that happens. So it's an industry that's really at boiling point just under the surface, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and on that you add the 35% attrition year on year, and you add
Wow, it's that high, is it?
it's
45%.
35%, and you know how competitive it is. And again, I bring up the Middle Eastern region, and the winners here is clearly the airline are clearly the airlines, because you got 10 resumes, and you got 5 resumes from first world countries, and you got 55 resumes from second and third world countries willing to work at half the pay, and who are obviously, the learning curve for the third world and the fourth world countries is much higher as compared to the learning curve for the guys coming out of first world countries. So it's a no-brainer. You probably take one from Europe and one from the US or one from Australia, and take 35-40 from Philippines and Bangladesh and India, and those kids have it pretty hard, and that's where the insanity lies, and that's where the whole thing starts. You start having the groupism and the gangism, and plus to that equation, as you rightly said, Mark, you add in the whole element of taking care of passengers on board and screeching babies, and you got to smile every time you see somebody, and you got to be cheerful, and you got to be and you got to walk the aisle for like 6-7 hours, and and that's fatigue, and I'm sure we know this. When you fly, your feet get your feet tend to expand because of compression, swell up, and then you got the pilots calling them, and and so it just adds up to so much of fatigue and mental stress that you're going to need some way to let that off. And the worst part to all of it is you have a minimum of 12 hours of crew rest.
Right.
So let's say I fly to Germany, I just have a 12-hour break, and you're dealing with your time zone change, and then you got to sleep for 12 hours, and you got to fly back. I mean, you're flying fatigued. It's
exactly. Look, I've got a ton of things that I want to get through with you today. So let's start going through my list here. Budget airlines, they've unquestionably changed the industry for both passengers, airports, and the manufacturers. What's your take on the whole budget airline industry and how that exploded into our lives?
Budget airlines is something that's something that would be here to stay. Emerging markets will see a far higher growth with budget airlines, and purely because they drive affordability. Yet it doesn't mean that there isn't a market for premium air travel. The market for business jets, the markets for first class and business class tickets will always be there. That those will have a far higher growth. But what budget airlines do nicely, Mark, is that they bring in new travelers into the fold of aviation. So that's a wonderful thing. And I think budget airlines will act more of inclusivity and bringing more and more people into air travel, and also start getting them to move over to a higher level of service, which you obviously get when you fly business class.
How have we seen the change in the strategy from the legacy carriers you talk about? And we're talking about, once upon a time, you either got on a British Airways flight or a Lufthansa flight or a Qantas flight, and you went from A to B. These days, you can get online, you can book a budget airline and go to those same destinations for, at sometimes half the price or even cheaper. So how have those legacy carriers changed their strategy within the industry to make more money and stay afloat?
I think the consumer has become far more discerning from what he was back in the mid 80s, and technology also plays a major vital difference. Back in the 70s and 80s, we walked over to a travel agent and he booked us a ticket, and he made a fat commission on it. So when we went online, the commissions went out the window. We booked directly with the airline. The transaction cost came down by at least 20%. And then on the 20%, we further started to, and then the consumer said, hey, wait a minute, I don't need a lounge. All I need is I need a ticket to go from place A to place B. And I'm just carrying a small little overnighter. Why should I pay for the extras? So, and then and then that moved over to the next step where the consumer started to put his interests first, and he paid for what he wanted. And that led to a further 15-20% reduction in air travel. Eventually, it evolved to a point where you paid for what you got. You paid for a seat, and you got yourself a seat. That was it. If you wanted anything extra, you paid for that extra. And it doesn't mean that, if you really, if you do this, if you get onto a low-cost airline website and you book a ticket with all the extras, it actually comes to exactly the same money you'd pay for a full service carrier.
Right.
So if you want to go full service, hey, by all means, be my guest. Go take a full service ticket, but you pay. It's only right that we pay for what we want, right? And that's how the whole telecommunications revolution started, and with cellular phones back in the mid '90s, and if you really look at it, the whole idea of fast food chains and outlets from Nando's to Burger Kings, and that's how that evolved, where you just want a meal and a baseline service, and you walk out to a Subway. And so is it a good thing? I think it's a good thing. I think it gives you more choices and options. And
I was gonna say, let's take a look at the impact the budget airline industry has had on the manufacturers of aircraft, because you've got people back in the day when they first started, like Tony Fernandez from AirAsia, who literally walked into Airbus and said, look, I want to buy 100 aircraft off you guys. And this was something that the manufacturers weren't used to in the past. And they had to change their whole mentality around production, and also the customer prioritization started to change. What impact did that have on the manufacturer side of the industry?
Well, I think first up, the manufacturers had to look at a very strong logistics backbone that came along with such diverse manufacturing. Because it's a very good question, because Airbus couldn't make all these components themselves, so they started to outsource and go to China and Taiwan and Malaysia and get over to East Europe and sectionalize manufacturing of the aircraft and say, okay, from us being manufacturers, we're now going to become assemblers. Okay, and that was driven on this, and that had to be driven on a very strong, robust logistics backbone. And I remember I used to work for Panalpina back in the day, and I'm sure you remember there was that whole Pearl River Delta project that everybody was banking big on. So it started by what you call JIT, or just in time, or third party, fourth party, fifth party, service providers, or 3PL, 4PL started. The key to success of getting an aircraft out was from a manufacturing time of 12 to 18 months. Both Airbus and Boeing brought it down to 6 months. Okay, and now with increased use of composites and carbon fiber, they're trying to bring it down to about 5 months of production, where 5 months of FAL, final assembly. Okay. And I think that's as best that they can go to. It's I wish we reach a stage maybe in the future where you plant a seed and you put water and you have a new airplane blooming in about a week. but that's not going to happen. You never know. Maybe in some alien civilization worldwide that might be a thing of the current or the present. But it's and how AirAsia, how Tony Fernandez came with that 100 aircraft order was on consumer and passenger demand. There was obviously, that started from somewhere, and that started from people like you and me, and the kid off the street who's on Facebook or Instagram, or a software engineer or somebody working and who wants to go back and be with his family. That's where it begins. That's where it starts from. It's his needs that we address as an industry, and as long as that's still fueled by the need and necessity for travel, then, and the most important part is and valuing time, then so be it. Then we gotta keep working towards meeting and matching airline requirements and delivery times.
What about the impact that the budget airlines have had on airport infrastructure around the world? You're sitting in KL in Malaysia today, and I guess KLIA is probably a fantastic example, being AirAsia's home base, of how an airport infrastructure has changed over the years to predominantly feed that budget airline appetite, hasn't it?
Oh yeah, and it's also about thinking ahead, Mark. Airports are usually planned looking at a 20-year window, right? So you want to build an airport keeping the demand 20 years ahead. So, and let's face it, usually no matter how good the demand growth projection is, it always falls short. So the airport you envisage in 20 years, you probably see that in 10. Okay, so that means the business is doing fine, right? Uh, Airport infrastructure has to evolve. We need to look at more efficient ways to manage and run our airports. We need to look at more ways of improving what you call of reducing runway occupancy time, of bringing an aircraft faster and in a more safe manner. So that means your air navigation and CNS ATM systems, which is communication, navigation, surveillance, air traffic management. We also need to look at how good our air traffic controllers trained. We were talking about psychological issues with pilots and crew. Now we also need to look at that for air traffic controllers. So the whole infrastructure, in quotes, which surrounds the entire, from the time you fly to all that's up in the sky to what you have on the ground and all that's around, is what we need to build and fragment and develop each of those little building blocks to being more efficient, safe, reliable, and designed for the future. It is going to be a challenge, because if you remember about 100 years ago, if we had to go to London, we hopped on a boat and we pretty much were sailing for 25 days and we really never cared about anything. But that's when we never cared about time. But now we do, because business works at the speed of thought, as they say, and so airports and airlines have to evolve. And I do hope that Asia takes some level of strides, because Beijing just opened up an airport which I think is absolutely gorgeous, and they've assured a guaranteed gate turn of 30 minutes, something which is unheard of.
Wow.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's because a lot of it comes from the people. They believe that it's people that drive efficiency, and that's the way it needs to function and work. And they're on a wonderful job in China. Airports would have to expand. I mean, you might not look at a physical expansion, but you may have to move to a whole new piece of land and set up a whole new airport and get that going and get it started. And that's probably the only way to go, Mark.
What's the busiest budget airline? What's the busiest airport in the world for budget airlines today? Do you know?
I'd probably say it's got to be some airline, and it's got to be somewhere in Asia. I would have assumed Ryanair and EasyJet at one time, and Wizz Air in Eastern Europe, but I'd probably have to take a guess. It would have to be somewhere in Asia.
Okay. Now, a couple of little quick tidbit questions for you personally about your travel philosophy. So when you travel, are you a window or an aisle guy?
I'm a window guy, yeah.
You want to see what's going on outside.
Situational awareness, Mark. Yeah.
First man out, huh?
First man out.
Yeah. And my second question about your personal travel habits. Are you a person that turns up to the airport hours before your flight, or are you always running late to get to the gate?
No, I'm right on the clock, sharp 2 hours before check-in.
Okay, 2 hours before check-in. Okay. Now, you're sitting in KL today, and I couldn't let you go any further in this conversation without talking about one of the greatest airline mysteries of all time. MH370, my 5 words to you is, what happened to that aircraft?
Well, there's so many conspiracy theories. The one that we're holding on to, which is the strongest and what we believe has happened, and we've said this to several news agencies in the past, from Wall Street Journal to Bloomberg and the South China Morning Post, and is that for somebody to deactivate aircraft systems, you clearly need you need a team of engineers and not one. And someone has gone down in the avionics compartment, and there have been guys working to deactivate some of the critical aircraft systems. So clearly, it's not an individual. There's a team involved in MS-370 disappearing. The second is that from what we have of the navigation, the Inmarsat satellite pings, is that the pilot did some ridiculously insane maneuvers, including go up to about 51,000 feet. Now, when you're at 51,000 feet, you're obviously disregarding the lives of those on board, because the cabin pressurization does not hold good at about 11,000. So you're obviously going to have to drop your masks, and they're probably, in about an hour, they'll probably collapse because of asphyxiation or something. And the third is that the route that he took was, I don't think it was about using the aircraft as a weapon, or rather using it to. It was more about aircraft theft. The intent was to steal the aircraft and take it somewhere. And if you look at the most common thing that comes up to anybody is you want to be evasive when you steal an aircraft that large. And the best way to be evasive is fly over sea, because you're avoiding most of the over sea there are no radars. You don't have a radar sweep that's long enough or large enough to capture an aircraft 200 nautical miles away. So he clearly had an intention to move. And when you go up to 51,000 feet, the range that you have on the 777 actually doubles, because those are pretty powerful engines. And if conventionally, if you could do 10,000 kilometers or 5,000 nautical miles, you can actually do almost 18,000 kilometers, or about 9 to 10,000 nautical miles. So clearly, this guy, he had an intention of doing something with that aircraft. He had to take it somewhere. He was working on somebody's instructions, and he couldn't. There's absolutely no way that he could have done this by himself. He definitely needed somebody on board, extremely good engineers, and you can't do this with an engineer with 3 to 4 years of experience. You need an experienced bunch of engineers to pull this off. And and so there is something that's transpired. There's something that I'm not sure when this would be declassified, but but we don't think he was going after Diego Garcia. We believe he was trying to take this aircraft to somewhere in Africa, and that's what we believe as part of what we're being, at least from a technical perspective. Some of the views that we've got from alien abduction to him trying to meet his girlfriend on an island, that's we're not buying that.
Listen, that's a fascinating insight. It's the first time I've ever heard anybody look at it in that particular way, and I'm sure people listening to this will be just as inspired by what you've just shared with us. Now, look, I've got a few things that I want to get through before the end of the show, so if you can give me some quick fire answers to some of these things. What can passengers expect to see on airplanes in the coming 5 to 10 years that perhaps we're not seeing today?
Lesser fatigue levels, lower cabin altitude, lower noise. That's going to be unique, and we're also going to play a little more up on IFE systems, so that the 3-4 hours that you spend is well spent. It may be replaced by having onboard internet, so you could be chatting up with your friends, or updating your Facebook or Instagram. So that's something which is definitely definitely to watch for.
Okay, you're probably fully aware of the Qantas test flight recently from New York to Sydney, 19 hours of continuous flight. What's going on with this, and is there an appetite out there for people to spend 20 hours on an aircraft?
Well, I mean, if you can live through 9 hours of a stinking toilet, 20 hours should just about be livable. But no, I think it's one hell of a feat. But let's look at it this way: 20 hours of flying has been done in the military before. You have bombers and military aircraft that do mid-air refueling, and they just keep flying. keep orbiting in space, right? So it's happened before in military. This is probably the first time we're doing it in commercial, um, and I think it's remarkable. I think it's a milestone in the world and history of flight by itself. Again, if folks like if folks like us can take it, and if we're good to sit 20 hours in an aircraft, but I don't think anyone would like to. We'd love to take a little short break somewhere. But I think the beauty of this is we have aircraft technology today that can fly 20 hours at a stretch. As opposed to flying into Dubai or Heathrow or Frankfurt and sitting on ground for 5 hours. But today we can actually save that time. We spend 20 to 28 hours flying, and that includes 5 hours of transit, right? This is 20 hours of continuous flight, so it really can't be that bad. But again, if you got a medical condition, make sure you update the airline about it. Make sure you inform them that you may need medical assistance, and it's only if you're sure of it, then take that flight. Otherwise, try and avoid it. But again, a milestone
absolutely.
for aviation. I think Qantas is done an outstanding job by making that flight work and also making it safe.
Mark, I've got another hot tip for you, mate. I've got another guest coming on the show who was actually on that flight from New York to Sydney.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to come and share with me that experience and what it was like to spend 19 hours and 16 minutes on board that Dreamliner out from the US.
Oh, wow, that's got to be amazing. I'm definitely going to be tuned in. Yeah.
Now, next question. Electrical propulsion systems in the commercial airline space. Is it going to happen, and when is it going to happen?
So we're already starting to see that with what you call autonomous flight vehicles, and small little pilotless UAVs and that. When is it going to move towards continuous flight? I think it would take a bit more time for that. My personal view is at least 15 more years where we could. I think that should be good enough for you to create a platform, test it out, which we could fly it from place A to place B with at least 10 passengers on board, run it on solar power, and if it's successful, then I think that's the way to go. I believe solar power is it. I think the amount of damage we're doing to our economy now, to our environment at the moment with carbon emission and that is just ridiculous. And I think solar energy and electric power should help ease it out. I certainly see that happening very soon because we've got a classic example with Tesla. Today, Tesla has revolutionized how we travel, how we drive our cars, and I see that similar technology being replicated up in with aircraft, and it should happen soon. My guess is between 15 and 20 years.
15 to 20 years. So, is the biggest challenge at the moment for the airlines their pollution and environmental impact? Is it because it's so much in the media these days that this is what's driving the change in technology quite rapidly for airlines to become a lot cleaner and more efficient?
I think being cleaner and lower emissions is definitely more important. Airlines wouldn't have cared about it if it hadn't been for global legislation and policy and more of a regulatory push. Airlines really wouldn't be bothered by it, but it's good that airlines are towing the line of emission control. The other bit that should affect or should help bring a change is trying to get rid of the old aging aircraft and the old fuel guzzlers. We still have economies and regions in the world that fly aircraft that they inducted back in the 80s and 90s. I think those have to be taken back, but there's also a cost of the new technology. I'll give you an example. A 787 can set you back between 150 to $200 million, which is a lot of money. If the 787 can be brought down to more affordable levels, then possibly some of the older legacy airlines can actually begin to adapt to this new technology. The third important part is somebody has to pick up the tab for aircraft financing, and let's face it, an airline's credibility and reputation to make money and be profitable is quite bad at the moment, and So we also do need strong, robust aircraft financing, backing and systems that can help airlines adapt to new technology, and financing terms also should be more conducive. So I'm hoping that aircraft leasing, some of the larger companies in the world come together and help back more robust financing with newer aircraft technologies.
Yeah, fantastic. Mark, look, we've whizzed through 1 hour today talking, and there's so much more I want to talk to you about. Would you be open to coming back on the show at some stage and having another go? Because I've got so many more questions. And what I'd actually like to do is I'd like to open this conversation up to my listeners to send me questions that we can already have prepared for you next time around, so that we get some of this airline flavor going from our audience, and asking you as the expert. Would you like to come back again?
I'd love to be back, Mark. It would be a pleasure to be back on your show.
Fantastic, because there's so many people out there who love aviation, the industry. They love talking about planes, and I'm sure they would be just as inspired as I've been today listening to you talk about all these different things from an insider's point of view. Before I go, though, I'm going to ask you one last question about the industry. And I read a fascinating book a number of years ago called Boeing versus Airbus, and it was a fantastic insight to the battle that goes on between the two largest aircraft manufacturers in the world. What's one of the most inspiring books you've ever read about the aviation industry?
The one that I read was the one which is about Southwest Airlines, called Peanuts.
Yes.
Yeah, that was a wonderful book, because that just talked about it started by highlighting the fact that if you get rid of that one olive from your salad, the airline can save over $25 million in a year. And I think the money saved from things like that can be invested back into encouraging aviation and promoting it in markets and regions. Like a good scholarship program for kids who can't afford air travel. Folks like us are more fortunate to be in the regions we are and being inspired by the kids out there who need the kind of support to achieve their dreams. So that'll be a good initiative, and I think that there should also be a constant sharing of information between all manufacturers. Sure, we compete with each other, but eventually we're for the travel and before collectively growing air transport as an industry and as a technology. And I think critical technology and safety learnings must be shared with each other, because it would be preventive with a disaster from happening. And I think that should be encouraged between everybody.
Great way to finish the show today, Mark. It's been an absolute pleasure to having you on the show. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get you here, but now that I've got you, I'm not going to withhold anymore. We're going to do another couple of shows together and keep bringing out this amazing knowledge you have on the airline industry that we all take for granted. And we get on a plane today and we don't really think too much about all those things that are going on around us. And you've done an amazing job today in sharing that with us. So thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Mark, it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. It's wonderful speaking with you, and thanks so much for the opportunity. I've been tracking you and watching your work, and you inspire us all, mate. And I want to absolutely honored to be on this program with you. Thank you so much. My first podcast, and I just hope I hope I did all right.
You did brilliantly, and we're going to speak again soon. Mark Martin, thanks very much for your time. What a fantastic insight Mark's provided there for us in this episode about the aviation industry and all the things that are happening, and some of the conspiracy theories that are out there about some of the things that have happened in the industry. So when we're next on a plane, have a think about some of those things, because you never really do know what's going on, do you, behind the scenes. So if you're looking for more episodes from the Global Travel Channel, head on over to our website at www.globaltravelchannel.com. There you'll find a list of all of our previous episodes and a few different ways in which you can download them by Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and a host of others that are all listed there on our website. If you do enjoy our content, please share it with friends, family, and work colleagues. We're trying to grow our Global Travel Channel global community, and we would love for you to recommend our content if you enjoy it. Okay, well that's about it for this particular episode. Until we meet again, my name is Mark Philpott, and I wish you all bon voyage.